Well, thank you, Father Stephen, who's here from the Diocese of St. Augustine in Florida with a group here that's with us, and so it's an honor to be with them. But this is not the passage that most priests like to talk about, but it is one we need to talk about because it is so prevalent. Now, the hot items we know. This is the voting coming up. The vote is coming up for not just the president, but legislators around, or positions of political positions all around the country. And we know the hot items: abortion, gay marriage, but divorce and contraception are completely forgotten. Nobody discusses those as hot issues or button issues that provoke discussion. Nobody, not even Catholics, discuss divorce and contraception amongst voting, and really even amongst our lives and the way we live in terms of the moral teaching of the church. They are completely forgotten because it's completely accepted. Divorce and contraception, completely accepted even amongst Catholics. Now, please don't shoot the messenger. I get letters all the time, Father Chris, I completely disagree with you. And I always say, well, it's not me you're disagreeing with. I simply am giving you the teaching of the church. What you do with it is between you and God. I will have to meet God one day, and I know I'm going to have to be accountable. Did I give you the truth? And that is what I'm going to do now. As difficult as some of it may be, but there is stuff here that makes sense. Jesus confirms marriage is to be between one man and one woman, not anything else. That's it. Marriage between one man and one woman, and it is for life. We just heard Brother Alex read this in Genesis. Now, Jesus teaches that true discipleship is not easy. Many can't follow it. The road is narrow and few follow it. And being a disciple is not to include concessions because of weakness. It's just hard. But the reward, when we get there, is going to all be worth it. Now, divorce is excluded and remarriage becomes adultery, Jesus says. Well, let's qualify this because the church, all authority was given to the church by Christ. So what the church also says on this is important. And sometimes the church qualifies what is listed or read in the gospel. Doesn't change it, it qualifies it. Now, what do I mean? The Greek word apoluo, translated divorce, means relinquishment of a legal right. That's what the word divorce means. You relinquish a legal right. Now, Moses allowed a bill of divorce, what Jesus just said, so it could provide some legal protection for a woman who would be abandoned. Her husband needed to relinquish his right to her so that now another man could be free to marry her and take care of her. That's the way it was in the ancient East. Now, so he is not really saying divorce is just unconditionally acceptable. He's not saying that. He is saying it was an unfortunate concession. Okay, let's unpack this, as Father Kaz says. Jesus restores to its original purity the dignity of man and woman in marriage that was at creation. Jesus refers to this. Now, God joined them as one, so husbands are not to dismiss their wives, but they do. We know this, and this is why there was a need for that law in Deuteronomy about Moses giving an issue of divorce. Now, verse 9 in the passage we just read says, though, what God has joined, let no man put asunder. So based on this verse and the Catechism of the Church, we can surmise that divorce in and of itself on one of the two parties, or maybe both, is sinful in and of itself. Now, there may be an innocent. One of the two parties may be innocent and not sinning. The other party may be guilty of the sin, but one of the two or both in every divorce is guilty of sin. There may be an innocent victim, one of the spouses, so therefore they are not guilty. Let's look at this. So last night I was going through the Catechism of the Church and my notes from seminary, because I took marriage and canon law. So I've been educated in this. And I also pulled out the Code of Canon Law. Let's start with the Catechism. Okay, 23. Now, a few weeks ago I said I gave a homily on marriage, but in that talk, don't say, well, Father, you're just repeating what you said a couple weeks ago. No, on that talk, homily, I told you what makes a valid marriage. If the marriage that you're in is sacramental, if it's valid. And now we're talking about the church teaching on divorce. So 23, 84, and 85 of the Catechism says, divorce is a grave offense against the natural law. It is immoral also because it introduces disorder into the family and into society. This disorder brings grave harm to the deserted spouse and to children traumatized by the separation. Then, contracting a new union adds to the gravity of the rupture, permanent adultery. Again, this is just giving you church teaching, which is my responsibility as a priest. Now, the next Catechism, 2386, says, it can happen, however, that one of the spouses is the innocent victim of a divorce decreed by civil law. This spouse, therefore, has not contravened the moral law. I point to my sister, who was abandoned by her husband, who was leading a double life, had an affair, walked out on her. Is she guilty of sin because of the divorce? He asked for the divorce. He wanted it. He carried it up. No, she's not guilty. There is a considerable difference between a spouse who has sincerely tried to be faithful to the sacrament of marriage and is unjustly abandoned, and one who through his own grave fault destroys a canonically valid marriage. So the church is expanding on the words of Jesus here, which she has the authority to do. So both parties may be guilty of the sin, or only one party may be guilty, but somebody is. Then 2383, going back, says, if civil divorce remains the only possible way of ensuring certain legal rights, the care of children, or protection of an inheritance, divorce can be tolerated and does not constitute a moral offense. Now, I was surprised when I took my marriage and canon law class that those are the only three they list. One is it can be allowed if protecting certain legal rights, such as 1, the care of children, or 2, the protection of inheritance, or 3, the protection of certain legal rights. I was surprised, only giving 3 reasons for divorce to be, this is very limited in scope, it appeared to me. What about abuse? What about a spouse that is enduring abuse? The church does not expect you to put yourself in danger. The church does not command you to remain in a physically dangerous relationship with an abusive spouse that could harm you. So I went to canon law. I couldn't find it in the catechism. So I kept my canon law book, and I found it in canon law. This is what I want to share with you. Canon law suggests separation first, with permission of your bishop, which can help to maintain the marriage bond. at first. The hope is that the spouse will change. Now, you might be laughing at that, but it can happen with the grace of God. The hope is that the spouse will change after there's a separation, and reconciliation might be possible. So these situations don't always need to end in divorce. The divorce primarily happens when, after the separation and other consequences, the abuser remains unwilling to change. This can be an indication that there was an impediment to having a sacramental or valid marriage in the first place, like I talked about a couple weeks ago, which would allow the spouse who had to leave to be separated to apply for an annulment. Now remember, divorce is not necessarily the sin. Marriage without an annulment, remarriage without an annulment, is the sin. So even if you're not guilty and you don't bother to get an annulment and you remarry, now you are morally culpable. Okay? So we don't hear this from the pulpit very much. I'm probably getting myself in big trouble here. But again, I got to give you the truth, because I will go before God and be accountable. Were you a shepherd? Did you shepherd my sheep? And I'm trying. So, Code of Canon Law, paragraph 1153, states, a spouse who occasions grave danger of soul or body to the other or to the children. Okay, so now you have one of the spouses who is putting a body or soul of their spouse or children in grave danger, or otherwise makes the common life unduly difficult. Unduly, that just doesn't mean, we don't get along much. Unduly difficult, provides the other spouse with a reason to leave. Now, it doesn't say divorce yet, to leave. That's the separation. Either by a decree of the bishop, so it would be best to get bishop's permission in your diocese, or if there is danger, immediate danger in delaying, you have the authority yourself to leave. But that's a separation, and you pray that it can still be reconciled. Now, the canon goes on to state that once such a danger has passed, so maybe the spouse was intoxicated that evening, and you had to leave with the children. It says once that danger has passed, common life should be restored. So if it's possible. Canon law says it is best to give permission for a separation, but it really doesn't mention divorce. Permission for divorce. So back to the Catechism. The Catechism says if this doesn't work, then divorce, such as to protect legal rights. So how does this reconcile with Matthew and Mark, who talk about this? Matthew says that you can't divorce other than unchastity, and people took that always to mean that your spouse was unfaithful. Actually, that's not what unchastity means when you go back to the original Greek. Unchastity in the original Greek means invalid marriage, not adultery. So that should be, you should be splitting from the person anyway, because the marriage was invalid. So I want to finish. I got so involved in this in seminary, I did a paper on it. And I did a paper on Mark 10, which happens to be this passage. So Mark 10, verse 2 through 16. I actually did a paper on this in seminary. I want to read you one small paragraph to finish. So this is what I wrote, my goodness, many years ago. Since hardness of heart and human weakness continues, even within the Christian community, it seems that the possibility of divorce is allowed to continue, but always with the recognition that it is always with the recognition that it is only necessary because of human failure and never as an automatic right, to be justified as a Mosaic command. Does this mean that Jesus declares Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4 invalid? No. It was designed to control abuses of divorce and protect the victims, mainly the wives. Properly applied, it can still have that function today. But the true impact of Mark 10, verses 10 through 12, which we read, is to shift the focus away from divorce and what allows divorce, like Deuteronomy 24, and shift the focus back to the marriage texts, such as Genesis 2:24. Interesting. That is what I put in my paper. So the bottom line is, instead of going to Jesus and saying, when and how can I divorce? Jesus is saying, let's refocus. Let's not focus on the legalities of the divorce, but let's focus on the beauty of the marriage and how we can make it work. Again, the church does not ask you to remain in a dangerous situation. The church does not say you have to be traumatized and tormented. But the church does say you have to give everything to try to make it work. And if then, and you are a victim, you have not contravened the moral law. The reason I bring this up is because 50% of Catholics have been divorced. Our percentage is exactly the same as regular society. Regular society is 52%, and Catholics are 51%, I think. And so let us take these words to heart. And I'm going to be offering this Mass today for all of those marriages, you here at the shrine, you listening on the live stream, that God's grace will somehow work its way into both of your hearts. Remember, on our own, we can't do it. But with God, all things are possible. Don't dismiss the possibility that God's grace can get in there and fix even the biggest of broken relationships. Don't mean to force somebody or anybody into danger, but we first pray to reconcile. What God has brought together, let no man separate. Let us take those words to heart and then listen to the church as she explains it so that we can understand. God bless you.